Hey guys, what's up? John from S&S Cycle here. As you can see on the rack, we have a 2001 883 Sportster. Today, we're going to show you how to convert it into a 1200. Before we get started on the teardown, let's talk about the S&S 1200 conversion kit. What comes in the kit? Two 3.5-inch bored cylinders, two forged pistons, two wrist pins, a gasket kit for your heads, your base, and your exhaust, assembly lube, oil rings for your pistons, and some C-clips. Now this kit is also offered in black, and it is also offered in a 1250 version. For your 1200 guys out there that want to convert to a 1250, we do have that in black and silver. Now that we've reviewed the kit, we know what we're working with, let's get started on the teardown. Now that we've disassembled the top end, we're ready to install our 1200 kit. A couple things to do before installing the kit. Cleaning the cylinders. You want to clean the cylinders to make sure there's no extra metal or waste inside the cylinders before installing them. Use warm water, soap, carb cleaner, or a parts washer. Make sure you dry them completely with a microfiber cloth. Another thing to note, pistons. Pistons are spec'd to each cylinder. Do not mix and match the pistons with each cylinder. You want to keep them with the ones that they came with. They're married to them. Another thing to take a look at is your piston rings. S&S piston rings have identifiers on them. Easy to indicate which one is used for which. Top compression ring will have a moly ring around the front of it, making it kind of a shiny ring right here. The secondary compression ring will be very dark and black with a little divot dot right here. And the expander ring is easily identified with the wavy lines and gold. When installing the expander ring, you will need two extra little rings, very thin. One will go on top and one will go on bottom. When you do install these rings, you need to make sure the expander ring, it has little sleeves on the back of it, and you want the ring to sit in front of the sleeve. You do not want the ring to sit on top of it when installing it. Some key tools to have on deck for the installation. A C-clip installation tool. Some people may not have this. You can use a pick. We try not to use a flathead screwdriver. You will bend the C-clip most likely. Please try to refrain from using that as much as possible. A oil ring compressor. For this one, it's going to be a 3.5-inch. That's what we need for that. Oil ring expander and a feeler gauge. Since I'm holding the feeler gauge, we're going to jump right into a major topic, checking the gap on your oil rings. Let's show you how to do that now. To find the gap with the rings, take the ring, insert it into the bottom of the cylinder by hand. Take the top of the piston, slide it into the cylinder, making the ring level and into the meat of the cylinder. Referring to the S&S instruction sheet, put your feeler gauge at the ideal gap ratio. Insert the feeler gauge into the side or wherever the break is, the gap is on the oil ring. Slide up and down, making sure you have good clearance, and you have gapped your oil ring. Repeat for all other rings. Now that you've checked the ring gap on all your rings, You're ready to install the rings to the piston. One thing to also note with the piston, there's an arrow pointing down right now, but it also says forward. So you want the piston to always point forward in the engine, So when you do mount it, we'll review that one more time, making sure that the piston is pointing forward. To install the oil rings, first one you want to start off with is the expander ring. Making sure the humps or grooves are facing to the back, and you want to have where the gap is, make a W pointing up. Start from the bottom and work to the top. So expander ring being the bottom, and you go up the compression rings from there. Once you have the expander ring on, you make sure it's moving okay and it's good. Now that you've got your expander ring installed, go ahead and slide on from the bottom your thin ring that goes on the outside of the expander ring. You'll have one on top and one on bottom. For these ones, you don't necessarily need to use the expander tool. They're so thin that you can walk them right up and slide them right in. See how that sets right in there? A good way to check that it's in good place is by pushing forward on the back, holding the thin ring on the bottom, and trying to slide the expander ring around. Now, if you can slide it around easily and not grab the whole thing and turn it, you're in a good spot. Let's move forward to the top one. Top thin ring that goes on top of the expander ring. We'll walk it down from the top. Not too drastically walking it because you don't want it to spread out more than it already is. If it falls into the groove, you're going to have to pick it out, and we'll keep on walking it down. Okay, now that we have both of our rings in there, it looks something similar to this. And again, you can check by rotating. If it rotates all together nice and smoothly, that means it's smashed together, and we should be good to go on the expander ring. Now that we have our expander ring and our gap oil rings installed, and everything moves nice and easily, they're sandwiched together, we're going to install our second expander ring. How we know it's our second expander ring on the second line, second groove, is it being dark, very dark black, and it has a divot or dot right there in the corner. That dot needs to shoot up when you install it. So you get your expander ring for this one because it's a little thicker. Spread it out like so. Slide over the top. You lock it into place and you release. Might need a little bit of hand finessing there to get it to lock in. You have just installed your second expander ring. Now that we've installed the second compression ring, we're going to install the top compression ring the same way we did the second compression ring on the top outlet using the expander tool. Opening it up, sliding it over the top, getting it into its slot, and releasing. And also to remember, the way to identify the top compression ring is with the moly outline, the chrome moly outline on the outside of it. It's shinier and it's a lighter gray than the second compression ring. We have just installed all of our oil rings. Now that we've installed all our oiled rings, we're ready to set the gaps of our oil rings in the correct position of the piston area. We're going to refer to the S&S instruction sheet. It has a template of where to position each one. Referring to the S&S instruction sheets, we're setting our gaps within the piston area. The top ring gap, top compression ring, would be right here. The second compression ring gap will be right here. And then the little bit of the harder ones is the oil rail gaps. Oil rail gaps, you're going to have one right here and one right here. The expander ring gap will end up being right here. Reposition all the rings to showcase the gaps in those correct orders before installing into the cylinder. Now that we've set the ring gaps in the correct place of the piston, we're going to repeat the same process of installing the piston rings on the other piston for the other cylinder, making sure we keep that piston in a generalized area with the cylinder so they always stay married. So we're going to go ahead and do the same process on this one. Now that we have installed the oil rings and we have repositioned the oil rings with the gaps being in the correct locations within the piston, we are ready to install the piston on the connecting rod. Before we did that, we actually installed some tubing. This is just normal rubber tubing that you can buy at any hardware store. It helps prevent any dinging on the actual piston when installing it to the connecting rod. Before installing, we're going to use some engine lube. We're going to insert some engine lube inside the piston using our finger, rubbing it all around, making sure it's nice and greasy. This is going to help the wrist pin to slide through nice and easy, no hang-ups. You're going to want to do the wrist pin itself and the connecting rod with some engine lube. The engine lube is provided within the kit, so it makes it nice and easy. You can get this done. Now that you've lubed up all three elements, you want to make sure before installing, of course, the forward position with the arrow is going to the forward position of the motor when installing. This is critical. Also, please note, we have installed one C-clip to hold the wrist pin in when going. You want to install the C-clip in one side first, then you will install the other C-clip in after inserting the piston and wrist pin. Let's go ahead and install. We've went ahead and started the wrist pin into the piston head itself. Notice clearance right there, keeping enough for the connecting rod to slide through. And take the piston, lay it on top of the connecting rod, and you kind of dance back and forth until you find the hole. Once you find the hole, you can slide it through. Like so. Push all the way as far as possible, and you're ready to insert your C-clip now. Now that we've made sure the wrist pin is completely pushed as far as it can go, just wiping it clean just a little bit, and we're going to install our C-clip. A couple things to note real quick before installing the C-clip. We did stuff the cavities of the case itself with some shop rags. This helps preventing any type of C-clip falling down in there. You never want that to happen. Other thing to note, when installing the C-clip, you want to make sure that it's completely seated. We'll review that again after I'm done using the installation tool. For this, we're using the C-clip installation tool. We're going to insert and rotate. And once you've installed the C-clip within the groove of the piston, you want to double check and make sure that it's fully seated by taking the end of a screwdriver, just pressing it all the way around, making sure you don't hear any type of snaps. Now this is a good thing to do a few times. Not too many times to do it. You don't want to see clip popping out inside of the motor. Other thing to take a look at is when we installed the C-clip, the open position of the C-clip is located up here, leaving room down here for a full round part where you can reach in and remove the actual C-clip. You never want to put the open position of the C-clip in this little opening right here. It'll be really hard to get out. Okay, now that we've doubled and triple checked our C-clip, making sure that it's fully installed, we're going to remove our shop rags from this side to get ready for installation of the cylinder. Remove our rubber tubes and install our new gasket. This is our new base gasket we'll be using. We also have new gaskets for the heads. Make sure it lines up and seats correctly. Perfect. Now we will grab our oil ring, compressor, get this lined up, ready to go. All right, almost got it on. Walk it down and seat it in. And give some poundage, little taps on top. Make sure it's seated in there. And take one of your shop rags that you had. Clean up the top real quick, get any excess nonsense. Lubrication, oil, any type of fibers. Give it some pounds. Seats in very good on the seal down here. Take a check all the way around the cylinder. Make sure looks good. Now we can repeat the process for the front one. Now that we have the 1200 kit fully installed, we're ready to install our heads. Just a note, the plugs in top of the cylinders that feed into the heads to help guide them into place, you have to press in before putting on your head. We're going to start with the rear head first. Following S&S instructions, there's a torque sequence. Putting the gasket on. Very good. Taking the rear head, we already have the push rod tubes kind of set in there. We're going to set it right on top and line everything up. Those push rod tubes will dance a little bit, so that's okay. And you kind of guide her in the pot. Okay. We're all locked and loaded and ready to put in our bolts. So you have two small bolts. These are head bolts and two large head bolts. The large head bolts will go on top right here, and the small head bolts will go on the back side on the drive side. We are working on the cam side. Your diagram is going to show you the sequence from the drive side. So that will end up being number 1 is back here, number 2 closer to the front tire. Number 3 on the top over here to the rear tire, and number 4 to the front. Tightening it by hand, starting in the rear with number 1 bolt. We're just going to hand tighten it in, and we're going to follow the sequence. It's on the S&S instruction sheet, starting with number 1. Kind of hard. When it gets to a good spot, you'll feel it, and you can't do it by hand anymore. Once you're done by hand, you will grab the torque wrench and torque in the same sequence. Tightening number 3 by hand, and number 4. In the same sequence, we're going to go ahead and torque these down now. First torque pass is going to be at 10 foot-pounds of torque. That was number 1. Number 2. And we're going to move on to number 3. Number 3. Number 4 is torque. Starting with number 1 again, we're going to go ahead and re-torque everything at 15 foot-pounds of torque for the second sequence. Number 1. Number 2. And number 4 to finish it out. For the final torque sequence of the heads, we're going to go ahead and keep it at 15 foot-pounds of torque. We're going to turn the bolts 1/4 turn or 90 degrees, and just make sure the head is sealed to the cylinder. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. We finished torquing the rear head. Now we're going to use the same procedure to mount the front head. Now that we've torqued down the heads, we're ready to reassemble the engine. We're going to use and reference the factory manual to do this. Let's get started. Okay guys, we got the bike completely back together. The 1200 kit is fully installed and we're ready to break it in. How to break in the motor. Heat cycles to start off with. 4 heat cycles, the first of 4 heat cycles being turn on the bike, let it idle, make sure it turns on, it runs, no leaking, oil flow is good, turn it back off. Let it cool all the way down. 2nd through 4th heat cycle is going to be the bike turning on, not using the throttle, let it warm all the way up to about 150 degrees, then turn it back off, let it cool all the way down. Now after you're done with that, we're going to take a mile ride, make sure everything is good, shifting gears, no leaking, come back, let it cool all the way down, and then you have your 50-mile ride. Your 50-mile ride is you riding normal, keeping it easy, good flowing, no lugging, no high RPMs, and not engine braking. Do not engine brake. After 50 miles, you're going to do your 500-mile oil change, of course, but you're going to go into your 1,000-mile break-in period. Your 1,000-mile break-in period is normal riding, no engine braking, no lugging, and you want to try to keep it around 70 miles an hour at the max. So let's go ahead and start breaking the motor in. There you have it, guys. Full installation of the 1200 kit, how to break it in, and what you need to know. If you have any more questions about the 1200 kit or any other products from S&S Cycle, please visit sscycle.com.